Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. I want you to look at the world for just a second through a different lens.
Yeah.
Usually when we see, a political scandal, a sudden wave of depression, or some geopolitical crisis that makes zero sense, we chalk it up to randomness, we call it bad luck, or human nature. But the material we are analyzing today, it claims that this view is, frankly, naive. It argues that if you believe in God, you're logically forced to accept a counterpart.
Right.
And not a chaotic, red-suited cartoon character, but a highly sophisticated, intelligent military opposition. We were talking about a literal hierarchy of hell. The claim here is that the friction you feel in your life and the chaos you see on the news, it isn't accidental.
Yeah.
It's the result of a specific military strategy fighting a war against God's purposes.
It is a jarring shift in perspective. I mean, most people, even religious people, they tend to view evil as a riot.
Yeah, just a messy mob.
Just a messy, uncontrollable mob of bad things happening. But the source material we're unpacking today, which is a deep theological breakdown of Ephesians 6.1, it argues that Satan's kingdom is a discipline. It's not a mob, it's a monarchy.
A monarchy.
Yeah, it has generals, it has supply lines, intelligence officers, and it has strict territorial assignments.
And that's the hook. If this source is correct, we are looking at a worldview where the visible world is just a thin veneer over a much darker, organized reality. Now, the goal of this deep dive isn't to turn this into some horror movie script.
No, absolutely not.
The source is explicit that this information isn't revealed to terrify people, but to equip them. So our mission is to map out this 10 ranks of hell. We are going to climb the pyramid from the foot soldiers all the way to the throne room to understand who or what is actually pulling the strings.
Exactly. The premise is simple. You cannot fight an enemy you do not understand. If you walk into a war zone thinking you're in a random street brawl, but you're actually up against a Navy SEAL team, you've already lost.
You need to know the rank structure.
You have to.
So let's get into the trenches. The source breaks this down into segments. We're starting at the bottom of the pyramid, ranks 10 and 9, which are responsible for the individual assault. Rank 10 is labeled the common demons. Now, based on the name, I'm assuming these are the grunts.
And they're the infantry, yes. The source references the biblical account of the Gerasene demoniac. When asked for a name, the entities reply, "My name is Legion, for we are many."
Legion.
And a Roman legion, it consisted of about 6,000 troops. So the defining characteristic of rank 10 isn't their individual brilliance or power. It is their sheer quantity. They are the masses.
If they're the lowest rank, does that imply they're harmless?
Yeah.
Or just less capable?
Definitely not harmless, but their scope is limited. They don't have the authority to, say, topple governments or run complex geopolitical strategies. Their job is harassment.
Harassment.
The source describes them almost like spiritual parasites. They attach themselves to individuals, specifically targeting patterns of sin, trauma, or pain.
So they aren't necessarily inventing the problem. They're amplifying what's already there.
That is a great way to put it. If you have a wound of rejection or a habit of anger, rank 10 is the infection that prevents it from healing. Their main tool is suggestion. They plant thoughts.
Okay.
And here is the critical insight from the source. These entities rely entirely on you believing that their whispers are your own inner voice.
So it's a deception of origin.
Exactly. They need you to think, I am worthless, rather than realizing something is suggesting that thought to you.
That is the really insidious part. But there is a silver lining here, right? The source makes a big deal about their staying power or lack thereof.
Huge silver lining. Because they're low-level infantry, they have very little authority. The source cites James 4.7. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. The argument is that rank 10 operates on a bluff.
A bluff.
If a believer actually identifies the harassment and pushes back, stands their ground, these entities cannot win. They flee. They are scavengers, not conquerors.
Okay, so that's the blunt instrument.
Right.
But then we move up to rank 9. The source calls these the special operatives, or the tempters. This feels like a shift from brute force to something more psychological.
It is a shift to intelligence gathering. Rank 10 might just throw mud at the wall to see what sticks.
Right.
Rank 9 studies the target. These are described as the architects of deception. The source uses the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness as the primary case study here. And if you look at that narrative, the enemy didn't just throw random, generic sins at him.
Right. It wasn't just steal a loaf of bread. It was specific.
It was hyper-specific. The temptations targeted his identity as the Son of God and his ultimate purpose. Rank 9 entities are observers. They track behavior over time. They know your triggers.
So they customize the snare.
They do. If you're a person who is disciplined and prideful, they won't tempt you with laziness. They will tempt you with arrogance.
The source brings up the story of King David as well. That always struck me as such a sudden moral collapse. He sees Bathsheba and he just falls. But the analysis here suggests it was a long game.
Much longer. Rank 9 constructs new pathways to destruction. With David, the trap wasn't just a moment of lust. It was a sequence leveraging his power, his comfort, and his isolation at that moment.
A domino effect.
Precisely. One look led to a thought, which led to adultery, which necessitated a cover-up, which then led to murder. Rank 9 engineers that domino effect. They aren't trying to ruin your day, they are trying to derail your destiny.
It's a sobering thought that there is an algorithm running on your spiritual weaknesses. But let's zoom out. The source makes a hard pivot after rank 9. We stop talking about individuals and start talking about geography and systems. Segment 2. Systemic and regional control. Rank 8 is identified as principalities.
Now we're getting into the heavy artillery. The Greek term used in Ephesians is archai. This represents the shift from a person to a place.
A place.
Yes. The source argues that these entities govern specific geographic regions, neighborhoods, cities, or even entire districts.
I think everyone has felt this, whether they're religious or not. You go to one city, maybe New York or London, and it has a specific vibe. Then you go to another, and it feels completely different. Is the source claiming this is spiritual, not just cultural?
It argues that the culture is the symptom of the spiritual. The source calls these spiritual atmospheres. Why is one city historically plagued by intense, irrational violence for decades, regardless of who is mayor? Why does a neighboring town struggle with massive corruption and greed? Or why do certain neighborhoods feel heavy and oppressive the moment you drive into them?
The secular view would say that's socioeconomics. Poverty causes crime, bad policy causes corruption.
And the source doesn't deny the sociology, but it argues the sociology is the visible manifestation of a principality holding a stronghold. These entities set the spiritual climate that makes certain sins flourish in certain areas. They create a path of least resistance for specific behaviors.
Here's the tactical question, though. You said rank 10 flees if you resist. Can I just resist a principality?
No. And that is a critical distinction in the text. You cannot take on a principality individually. They're entrenched. They have legal rights over the territory, often established through generations of history on that land.
So what's the solution?
The source asserts that dislodging a principality requires corporate warfare groups of people praying with sustained, unified effort. You don't take back a city on your own.
Moving up the chain, we hit rank 7. The powers. If principalities are about geography and land, what are powers controlling?
Structures. The Greek word is exousiai, which implies delegated authority. These entities target the institutions that make a society function: the government, the education system, the media, the judiciary.
This is where the source uses the phrase Satan's throne. That sounds incredibly dramatic, but what does it actually mean in a modern 21st century context?
It implies a seat of legislative authority. The argument is that rank 7 entities don't try to make you personally sin. They try to corrupt the system itself so that sin becomes the law. When you see a societal value shift, where something that was considered evil or harmful for 5,000 years is suddenly codified as good and necessary, that is rank 7 at work.
So they infiltrate the rulebook.
Precisely. And the most disturbing detail the source provides is that they rely on human cooperation. Rank 7 entities function by whispering lies to influential leaders, judges, politicians, professors, cultural icons. These leaders often believe they are being progressive or enlightened.
But they're actually unwitting proxies.
Exactly. The source argues they are executing a dark agenda to normalize evil.
It really reframes the way you watch the news.
Yeah.
It suggests that the culture war isn't just people shouting at each other. It's a battle over who is influencing the influencers.
It also explains why winning souls one by one feels like bailing out the ocean with a spoon if you ignore ranks 8 and 7. You have high-level entities specifically tasked with holding the institutional culture in darkness.
We are climbing higher now. We've left the earth and the institutions. Segment 3 covers the cosmic and heavenly war. Rank 6, 5, and 4. Let's start with rank 6, the rulers of darkness. The Greek word is cosmokraters.
Which sounds like a comic book villain, I know.
Yeah.
But the literal translation is world rulers. Think of these as the administrators of the world system.
World system is a term that gets thrown around a lot in theological circles. Can we define that for the listener?
Think of it as the operating system of fallen humanity. It's the global default setting. Rank 6 entities don't just influence a nation, they maintain the fog that covers the entire planet.
The fog.
They ensure that, without divine intervention, the natural gravitational pull of the human race is toward selfishness, rebellion, and materialism.
So they are the ones keeping the lights off. They ensure that the atheist worldview, that matter is all there is, remains the default assumption for the masses.
Exactly. They maintain the blindness. Then, just above them, you have rank 5, spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. Now, this can be confusing because we usually associate heaven with God.
All right, so why are there demons in the heavenlies?
It's a matter of dimension, not destination. In this context, the heavenlies refers to the second heaven, the invisible spiritual dimension just above our physical reality.
Okay.
And rank 5 is unique because their primary function is combat. They engage directly with angels.
The source brings up the story of Daniel here. It's one of the strangest, most specific passages in the Bible regarding spiritual warfare.
Daniel 10. It gives us a rare glimpse behind the curtain. Daniel prays, and for 21 days he gets silence. Finally, an angel arrives and says, essentially, I heard you on day 1, and I was coming, but the prince of Persia withstood me.
Wow.
The source argues this interception was a rank 5 or rank 4 engagement, a spiritual blockade in the atmosphere that literally delayed a divine message.
That is a wild concept, that prayer isn't just a text message that goes through instantly. There is a war zone between us and the answer.
It validates the necessity of persistence. But notice the angel mentioned the prince of Persia. That brings us to rank 4, the territorial princes. These aren't just city managers like rank 8. These are demonic royalty.
Royalty implies lineage, authority, and history.
And longevity. These beings rule over empires. They shape national destinies for centuries. The source suggests that things like intense genocidal nationalism or specific false religions that grip a region for 1,000 years are the work of rank 4.
Cultural strongholds.
Exactly. They create cultural strongholds that make entire populations resistant to the gospel, and they report directly to the top brass.
Which brings us to the inner circle, the final tier. Ranks 3, 2, and 1. The source notes that as we get to the top, the nature of these beings changes. We aren't talking about monsters anymore. We are talking about something much more impressive and terrifying.
We are talking about fallen majesty. Rank 3 is the fallen anointed cherubim. We have to remember that before the fall, these beings stood next to the throne of God. They were the highest order of creation.
The source calls them the intellectuals of the fall.
Because they retained their immense intelligence. They aren't mindless beasts. They are geniuses. They know the nature of God better than we do. They know how glory works. They know the intricacies of creation. And they weaponize that knowledge.
So they're the field marshals.
That's a good way to put it. They're deployed only when major strategic operations are threatened.
And above them, rank 2, the generals.
The War Council. These are the strategic architects. They generally don't fight, they plan. They design the grand arcs of history, global persecution waves, the rise of ideologies that sweep the planet, the subtle corruption of the church from the inside.
Like a cabinet.
Yes. When the source mentions Job 1.6, where Satan arrives at a meeting with God rank 2, are likely the entourage accompanying him. They are his cabinet.
And finally, rank 1, the top of the pyramid, Lucifer, Satan. But the source stresses something really interesting here. It warns against the caricature.
Right, the guy in the red suit with the pitchfork. That cartoon is actually a tactical advantage for him because it makes him look silly, like a fairy tale. The source describes him as the former seal of perfection. He was the most beautiful, most powerful being God ever created.
And the origin of evil wasn't a mistake. It was pride.
The famous 5 I wills from Isaiah. I will ascend, I will raise my throne, I will make myself like the Most High. It was the moment a created being decided he wanted the creator's job. But here's the paradox, and the source hammers this home. Rank 1 is furious.
Why? If he has this massive organization, this hierarchy we just described, he seems to be running the show pretty effectively.
Because he knows the clock is ticking. The source asserts that while he is currently operating as the prince of this world, he is legally a defeated enemy. It cites Colossians 2.15, saying that Christ disarmed the powers and authorities.
So he's not fighting to win.
He knows he can't win. He's fighting a scorched earth retreat. He wants to take as many people down with him as possible before his time runs out. That makes him incredibly dangerous, like a cornered animal, but it also limits his ultimate authority.
That brings us to the so what. We've just outlined a terrifying, highly organized machine designed to destroy humanity, it feels. Well, overwhelming.
Hmm.
If this hierarchy is real, do we even stand a chance?
If it were just us versus them, no, we wouldn't last a second against a rank 9, let alone a rank 3. But segment 5 covers the counter strategy. The source points back to the armor of God in Ephesians 6.
We've all heard of the belt of truth and the shield of faith. It often sounds like a nice metaphor for just being a good person.
But the source argues it's actually technical, tactical gear. Each piece is designed to counter a specific rank. The belt of truth isn't a fashion statement. It is the specific countermeasure to rank 9's lies. The shoes of peace allow you to navigate the turmoil created by rank 8's territorial unrest.
And the core strategy isn't attack, it's stand.
That is the single most important takeaway. The believer isn't fighting to gain the victory. The source argues Christ already won the victory. The believer fights to maintain the ground that Christ took.
Hold the line.
The command is to stand firm. You are holding the line against an enemy that is trying to push you off a foundation that is already secure.
That shifts the perspective entirely. You aren't storming the castle, you're defending the castle that's already yours.
Exactly. It changes the posture from anxiety to confidence.
This has been a heavy deep dive. We've gone from the whispers in our heads to the war rooms of fallen angels. It really forces you to look at the world differently.
It challenges the modern assumption that the physical world is all there is. It suggests that history, politics, and our personal struggles are actually just the visible surface of a deep, invisible ocean of conflict.
And that leads me to a final thought for everyone listening. The source suggests that much of what we call bad luck, random tragedy, or even just human nature is actually orchestrated military strategy. If that is true, how many of your daily thoughts are actually your own? And how many are whispers from a rank 10 operative just waiting to see if you'll take the bait?
It's a question worth asking every time you feel that sudden urge to give up.
Thanks for thinking deeper with us.